Hi, Irene here. So on this video we are going to be covering the basics of Dynamo in Revit. So we're going to do a very basic script just to see how the inputs and the orders in which we put things together give us as a result a basic geometry. Full disclosure, I am not a Dynamo expert. I don't use Dynamo on a daily basis. I know only the basics of Dynamo, so you're in good hands. So let's get started. Okay, tiny Irene here on the bottom left side. So now that we are on Revit, before we get on with Dynamo, one very important thing that we need to do in preparation to work with Dynamo is setting up our unit system. The reason for this is because Dynamo is basically a unitless software. That means that number inputs that you produce mean nothing to Dynamo. Like, what is that value? Is it a meter? Is it a feet? Is it like tacos? Dynamo doesn't know and Dynamo doesn't care. So what's usually going to happen is that Dynamo will pick up on whatever unit system you are working on in Revit. So for example, if you're working in millimeters, then when you are doing your scripting in Dynamo, the values that you're going to be inputting, it will be taking them in millimeters. Now, my recommendation here is that you switch to a greater unit just to make it a little bit easier to understand like what values are going to be inputted, and just to make it a little bit easier. So for example, if you're going to be working in imperial, you can keep it to inches, unless let's say you're like an urban planner and you need to work on feet or yards. But if you're going to be working with metric, my recommendation would be that you switch to meters. So switching to meters is the first thing that we're going to do here. So on Revit, I'm going to type UN to access my project units. Now here on length, I'm going to switch to meters and centimeters. There we go. Okay. And now we can open Dynamo. And we're just going to go ahead and start with a new file. So I'm going to expand this because for the time being, I'm not really going to care about what I see in Revit. Whatever happens in Revit, we're going to ignore it for the time being. So I'm going to click on the expand window so we have a little bit of a more comfortable working space. So first thing, let's take a quick tour of the user interface of our Dynamo. So on the top left, you're going to have your main menu. Pretty standard at this point. You have file with things like new, open, save, whatnot, edit, undo, redo, copy, paste. Pretty straightforward. View, you have kind of like your camera movements, zoom, pan, show consoles, and whatnot. Again, most of these things you can leave them as they are. Packages is the option that is going to allow you to search for other people or company scripts, and then you can download them. So if I go here to search for a package, this is going to take a while, so there you go, we're ready to go. And here you can see some scripts to begin with. Again, not all of them mean anything to me. But if you know what you're looking for, you can type it. So for example, there is a set of scripts that I have from a company called Architree. So if I go here and I type Architree populate. So you just click here to install latest version. Let's say I'm going to say yes. I already have it, of course, but that's okay. I'm going to say okay, and then it's going to download, install, and what you're going to see is that those scripts are going to appear either on the left side here on your library of nodes and information, or it's going to appear in another section that allows you to place scripts directly within Revit. So packages it's kind of like a cheat sheet. All right. So now that we have that, settings. Now for settings, again, most things you can ignore, but there are a few that I consider quite important. First of all, number format, how many decimals you want to work with. Again, I'm gonna keep things pretty casual so you can keep it without decimals, but if you're working with a lot of precision, you can add them. The geometry scaling, this is a very important one. And you want to make sure that you set it up before you start building your script. So this is like the name of the box says, the geometry working range. So the idea here is that you kind of need to know how big the thing that you're going to be generating with your script is, and you kind of have to scale that so Dynamo will have an easier time managing your units. So for example, here on small, it's telling you that like it will work with units that go 0.000001 to 100 units. So this is like a really tiny stuff. Then we have medium. Medium is going to go from 0.0001 to 10,000 units, and so on and so forth. So again, depending on the scale, like how big is this going to be just like a little wall detail, or is it going to be a facade detail, or is it gonna be, you know, a sidewalk that is going to extend along an entire, like, you know, city size park. So you have to choose the scale before you start building your script. So in this case, we're going to keep it at medium, and we're going to apply changes. So again, two very important things that you want to make sure that you check before you start building your script is number one, the unit system that you have set up in Revit, and number two, the under settings, the geometry scaling. Okay. Again, for the rest, we're going to ignore this. You also have the help. On the left side, we have our library of nodes. So we're going to see how we can move through this library in a minute. And right now, my tiny head is covering it. So let me turn that off for a second. On the bottom left, you're going to see this button here that says automatic. So basically what's going to happen is that as you type your script, you're going to see a preview of what that script will be producing behind the script, so to speak. And it's going to be updated automatically. So as soon as you input something, you're going to see the change immediately, because that change is set up here to automatic. Now, if you are working with a less powerful computer, your computer having to automatically update every time that you do a little change may end up kind of like burning your computer. So if you are working with a potato, you can switch to manual. So in manual, you're going to see that here you have this option run, which is going to give you the freedom to, let's say, like build a script up to a certain point and then run the update so you can see how that script is like turning. For my computer in particular, I'm going to keep it to automatic. All right, and I'm going to bring my head back. Boop. All right, and then we have our main working area. You have the, you know, classic movement types. Again, remember, you have basically two screens that are overlaying each other. You have your graphic view navigation, so this is your script screen, and you have your 3D preview screen. So by default, you start on this script screen, and on this screen, you basically can do two things. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, and you can pan. So wheel forward, we don't have anything, so we're not seeing anything happen. Wheel forward, zoom in, wheel backwards, zoom out, and then pressing the wheel to pan. If we switch to the 3D preview, which you can do either by clicking here or by clicking Control B. So if you pay attention here on the top right, every time I press Control B, it switches from one screen to the other. This is going to give me access to that 3D preview, and see, wheel forward, zoom in, wheel backward, zoom out. Pressing the wheel is going to allow me to pan, and right-clicking on your mouse is going to allow you to orbit around, okay? So let's switch back to the script mode, Control B. Control B, there you go, there we are. So let's get started with some basic library elements. So again, here you have kind of like these categories, and within them you have a few things that you can do. So for example, dictionary, you can have like key values, You have on display, like if you want to do color ranges or a watch, geometry. So again, we're going to keep it within the geometry. We're going to keep it a little bit simple, but you have also import, export, input, list, math, Revit, directly scripts, and strings. So again, this can be a little bit overwhelming, so we're going to start pretty basic. So let's create a point. Now, when you want to get a node, there are two different ways that you can get that node. One is to kind of like manually search through the library. So for example, let's say that I'm gonna go on geometry. Okay, here we go. We have points, so I'm gonna click and then click here again, point, and here you're gonna see all the different point options. So you have point by Cartesian coordinates, and I like how it gives you this preview on the right side that gives you a little bit of an explanation, and it also tells you what input you are going to be required to provide and what output you're going to get. So we have point by Cartesian coordinates, we have point by coordinates x, y, z, point by coordinates x and y, point by cylindrical coordinates. Like, there's a lot of options here, right? So if you want to add that node, all you're going to do is click on it, and here is my little node. There she is, beautiful. And if I zoom in, see, I'm getting close, and if I press my wheel, I'm panning. Now what you can see is that we haven't just created this node. Also on my preview here in the background, I'm going to go Control B to switch to the back. You can see that now there is a cute little dot. But what you're going to notice is that you can't do anything to it. Like, you can move it here, but you don't know where you're moving it at. And more interestingly, if I click Control B now, you're going to see that these two guys magically appear. So again, this goes back to the way that scripting works. You can't just do things. You have to provide an input in order to get an output. So a point by default is going to be on the 0, 0, 0 coordinates. But when you move that point, it's going to automatically create a coordinate on X and on Y in this case. Now, this is a good example of what can we do if we don't want what has been created. You can use a selection box. So click, drag, release to select the elements that you do not desire to work with, and delete them, and then see, immediately my point goes back to 0. So here you can see that relationship between input and output. So okay, cool stuff. So what I want to do now is I want to kind of like myself manually create the script that is going to allow me to move this point instead of just me savagely move it through the space. So okay, so now we need, again, we need values, we need numbers, but you're gonna see if I try to click here, it's not letting me type in the value. I need a value node. So what I'm going to show you here is the other way to find things on this library. So again, one way is you go through the options, you click on the tabs until you find the thing that you like. The other way is if you have somewhat of an idea of what is it that you're trying to build, you can just type that on the search bar. So for example, if I know that I want to type in a value, I can come here and say, let's say value, and let's see what comes out. Okay, so we have a bunch of options for value. So maybe that isn't exactly the word that we want. How about number? Okay, so here we have a few options. So see, this one is just going to allow me to create a number. It doesn't require any input. When you see that no input is required, that means that the input is going to be within the node. Or we have a number slider. So let's just do basic number here. So I'm going to click here, and there is my number. Now the other thing is that you're going to notice that just because I created this number here, if I come here and I type, let's say 5, enter, nothing's going to happen. And that is because my number node is not connected to my point node. Like they're both there, but they're not talking to each other. So now we need to connect them. One recommendation is that, again, because the script always works left to right, you always want to connect left to right. So you're not going to come here, like let's say that I want this number to represent the X value. I'm not going to click X and then bring it to 5. I mean, you can do it, but sometimes that can cause some issues. So I'm going to go Control Z, and instead you always want to go from left to right. Click. One really cool thing is that you can have one node serving multiple inputs. So for example, if I want this point to move kind of like on a diagonal, what I can do is I can feed this 5 number node into both X and Y. And what's going to happen is that anytime that I change for X, it's also changing for Y. So if I come here and I make this 10, it's going to move kind of like on that diagonal. If you no longer want a connection, the way that you're going to break them is going into the input, click, click, and there you go. The connection has been broken. Another thing that is going to make life a little bit easier for you is that if there is already a node on the screen, you can just copy paste it. So for example, let's say that I want to do here an input for X and an input for Y. Instead of me having to go back here, click, drag it, connected, what I can do is I can just select my number node, Control C, and then Control V, and there she is. And now I'm going to connect it to my Y. There you go. So see, now I could have each of them be individual values. And let's do it one more time. Control V for my Z. So click, click, and there we go. Let's say that I'm going to move this one too. See, so again, the idea here, I know this may look like, wow, that's a lot of work just to move a point, but the idea, same as when we're working with parametric families, is that the setup is quite a long process, but once you have created this setup, is going to automate the process. Like it's going to be a lot easier for you to move this point, because instead of having to manually move it around, you're just going to change the input and that will automatically output something for you. Okay. So we have a point. Now that point doesn't really do anything for us in Revit or otherwise. It's just a point. It's not really geometry, but it's a good starting point, pun intended. So what we can do now is we can use this point as the origin for a geometry, for example. So let's say that I want to draw a circle. Now going forward, I'm going to just be using the search bar just because I personally find it a little bit quicker. But if you are in the exploration mood, you can continue just kind of like exploring the different tabs within the library. So let's say that I want to create a circle. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to type circle on my search bar. And again, you're going to get all of the results that kind of have to do with circles. So for example, you have a circle by center point radius. That basically means that in order to create your circle, your input is going to be a center point and a radius that is going to be a value. Or you can have by center point radius normal, or by plane radius 3 points, many more options. So let's say I'm going to go with this option here, center point radius. All right, so again, I have a circle, but right now this circle is not responding to anything because I don't have any input. But if I connect here my point to the center point, there you go. See how my circle has now moved to where my point was. But I still don't have control over the radius. For that, I would need a value, so another number. Now I'm going to come back here, and instead of just copy pasting this same number values that we have here, I'm going to use this time a slider. Now what I like about the slider is that it's kind of same as the number, but a lot easier to do iteration, and I'm going to show you why. So I'm going to connect my number slider to my radius, and instead of me typing here the exact value, what I can do is I can just click and drag the slider here and just play with that dimension. So again, this goes back to the purpose of Dynamo for iterative design. When you don't know exactly what is the value that you want it to be and you just want to test out different options, the slider is going to allow you to play with those values a little bit easier. And the other thing that I like is that I can come down here, click, and you can kind of create a boundary for that slider. So my minimum is going to be 0, but let's say that I'm going to say here that my radius shouldn't be any less than 1. Because if it's 0, it's like, okay, that is not really a value. So see, by making it 1 minimum, my minimum radius is going to be 1. Let's say that I don't want my radius to be any more than 10. And so see, now if I take it all the way far, it's going to be, if I make it 10, that's going to be so 20 diameter for my circle. And the other thing is the step. So the step is those increments. So you can see here that I'm going 8, 6.6, 4.38.8, and so on and so forth, because my step here is jumping every 0.1. But for example, if I come here and I make it that it can only go every 0.5, so that is like the increments. So you're gonna see that next time that I move it, now it's 3, 3.5, 4, 4.55, 6. So in increments of 0.5. So I really like the slider for this purpose in particular. It makes it a lot easier to play with the values of the object that you are trying to create. Now a circle is kind of obvious. It was kind of like the easy mode. Let's say that I want to create a square. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna look for a square.
That's right, it goes in the square hole.
A square. Okay, so you have the square function. So here's an interesting thing. A square really isn't a geometry, like a precise geometry in the most strict of senses. A square is a type of polygon, a type of uniform polygon. So if I want to create a square, what I can do is I can look for a polygon. See? So now I can create a regular polygon. So I'm going to click here, and you're going to see that my polygon is going to have some very similar requirements as my circle. In this case, it's asking me for a circle because it's regular. So going back to geometry, polygons can be inscribed or circumscribed. That basically means you draw a circle and then the polygon is built within that circle. So I can connect this here. So see, that is going to create my polygon within that circle. And now for the number of sides, let's say that I'm just going to do a number value here. And now I can come and connect this, and ooh!
Hello darkness, my old friend.
Whenever you get the yellow box of death, it basically means that something in your code is not working. Something in your script is not abiding by the rules. Sometimes it can be that you have put the wrong kind of node for the input, or it can be that the values or information that you're typing are either incorrect or incomplete. Now, in this case, what is my problem? Well, my problem is my number of sides, because the definition of a polygon, the smallest numbers of sides that a polygon can have are 3, which would generate a triangle. So when I change this to 3, there she goes back. So all I'm trying to show here is that when you get that yellow box, don't necessarily panic. It just means that, you know, you're not communicating with Dynamo correctly, and some information needs to be revised. So again, if I would want to create a square, I switch this to 4, and bam, there I have my square. Now let's say that I don't want a uniform square. Let's say that I want a rectangle. So a rectangle, again, same thing. I'm gonna type here, and this is what I like, why I like to do it this way, because it kind of like helps you better understand the rules of Dynamo. So if I come here and I type a rectangle, like, why not? Just try it. Let's see what comes out. Okay, you're gonna get a rectangle that requires a plane, a width, and a length. I don't have a plane. What about this? The width of a rectangle that requires a rectangle. Okay, that's not really what we want to do. So you have a bunch of options here. None of them are exactly what I want. So again, this is the part where I find it very handy to explore other people's scripts to see how they have solved the problem. So for example, the one that I found is that if I want to create a rectangle, I can do that with a CUBOID. I don't know how to speak. So we have a cuboid, in which we have width, length, height. We have a cuboid with an origin. So again, I'm trying to tie everything to the center point that we've created. So let's go with this guy here. So click, and there she is. So what I can do here is I can, for example, delete anything that I don't want to use. So I'm not going to be using this guy. I'm not going to be using this guy. So now I'm going to replace it. There's my little cuboid, and I'm going to connect it there. And once again, here for my width, length, height, I can use my number slider. So Control C, V, V. There you go. And I'm going to collapse this. Let's say we're going to keep those parameters. And once again, and what I like about this one in particular is that it's not just giving me a shape, it's giving me an actual volume. See? So now I can come here and say maybe I want my my width to be, let's say 2 by 4 by 6, whatever. Or maybe it's the opposite, like let's say that this guy's 2 and this guy's gonna be 6. And there you go. So as you can see, the most important thing here is you have to pay attention to what input is required, what output you're going to get, and then start creating your strings. Now, this is a very simple formula to create a very simple shape, but another thing that I want to show you is how to make things a little bit more understandable. So there's two things that you can do to facilitate. One is you can rename your nodes. So for example, if point by coordinates is kind of annoying, you can come here and double click, and that is going to allow you to change the name of the node. So I could call this guy, let's say, center of rectangle. There, see? So it makes it a little bit more straightforward. And then this guy, I can call it cube, let's say. So it makes life a little bit easier. It makes it a little bit more straightforward to understand what the hell is going on. Doesn't make a lot of sense here because our script is quite simple, but as things get more complicated, you will be grateful that you can kind of like rename your different nodes. Now we have our cube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce my Dynamo screen so we can see how that is looking in Revit. So I'm going to come here, click and drag, move it to the side, and there is our cube rectangle box thingy. So I'm going to click here on 3D view, and there he is, except not really. You're going to notice that you cannot interact with it. And that is because what you're seeing on Revit is a preview. Dynamo is showing you how that cube will look once you bring it into Revit, but it's not there yet, because again, right now all we have is a script within Dynamo. So the final step is, after you've done everything, you need to import that geometry that has been generated in Dynamo into Revit. So to do that, we're gonna once again go into our search library, and I'm gonna type import. And once again, you're gonna get all of the options that kind of like check that search. But we're gonna focus specifically on import geometries. I always go with the plural instead of geometry, just out of laziness. So I'm gonna click here, and basically all we have to do is connect this, and bam, there is my cube. Isn't she pretty? And that's it. Now that I have it here, see, now I can select it and move it around. Oops, it's not gonna. Why is that? That doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. This is because you still have your script running, and in your script you haven't told Revit, Dynamo that you want to move that object. So if you try to move it, Revit is basically telling you, I'm still connected to that Dynamo script. So in order to be able to manipulate this cube now in Revit, what we would have to do is go here and save and close our script. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to go save as. I'm gonna put it on my desktop and I'm gonna call it box. Okay, save. Now I can close, and now you will see that if I try to move my box, now I can. Now you will still have the preview, don't panic. What's gonna happen is that next time, like, you're gonna close Revit, and next time that you open it, it's gonna be gone. This is just kind of like still showing that preview, but now you have your geometry generated in Dynamo, and you can move it, you can rotate it, for example. Now it's in your Revit model. And that is going to conclude this video. Hope you liked it, and let me know if you have any questions. Cheers!